I am very happy to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jill Stein. Dr. Jill Stein is an organizer, a physician, and an environmental health advocate. As the Green Party presidential candidate in 2016 and 2012, she gave national voice to the green agenda that progressives of all stripes now give lip service to, from emergency Green New Deal to Medicare for all, a student debt bailout, and reparations. She also annoyed duopoly by promoting a demilitarized foreign policy. Following the election, Jill was targeted by a McCarthyite investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee for 3 years. Now, in the face of growing political repression, she's working to preserve public matching funds and ballot access to the critical grants and other grassroots candidates to challenge the parties of war and Wall Street in the presidential election. I would very much like to welcome Dr. Jill Stein.
Thank you so much, LeBeau. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Great. Okay, terrific. So first, let me just say it's a real honor to be here, and I'm so inspired listening to everything you're saying and everything you're doing. And I just want to sing your praises. You know, I think the Florida Green Party is exactly on course, doing exactly what we need to do. And I feel like everything I intend to say has already been said. And thank you for leading the charge. So I'm just going to connect some dots here and among things that have already been said, mainly to just affirm that what you're doing is absolutely essential, necessary, and right. And I'm going to give my perspective, you know, as a former presidential candidate, sort of seeing what happens after that. And where we are right now. And as an activist, I by training, I was a medical doctor and practiced for decades, but then moved from clinical medicine into political medicine because it's the mother of all illnesses that we have to fix if we're going to fix everything else that's literally killing us. So I'm just, you know, speaking from my perspective as someone who was tricked into running for office back in the year 2002 and could never break away after that, you know, because it's like once you have seen what's actually going on, you don't back away from it. There's nowhere else to go. You know, this is where we put our feet down and, you know, fight for an America and a world that works for all of us, because if it doesn't work for all of us, it's not going to work for any of us. So at any rate, I really appreciate having a chance to share my perspective on where we go from here as activists and the forces that are arrayed against us because we are such a threat, such a serious threat to an empire that is really teetering at the brink, an empire which is unsustainable economically, socially, in terms of racial justice, in terms of its food and water supply, the climate, you name it. The chickens are coming home to roost on this abusive system that we have. And it is, it is a moment of crisis and it's a moment of incredible opportunity. And what I'm going to try to do right now is share my screen here, if I can. Hang on one second. Let me give this a try.
I just made you a co-host, Jill. You should get it.
Thank you. Okay, great. And here is my PowerPoint, and let me know if you are seeing that. Are you seeing a PowerPoint?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. And are you still seeing me as well, or are we totally on the in the presentation?
Seeing both.
So people in the room can see you. People on the live stream will only see the presentation because of technical issues.
Okay. All right, great. No worries. Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to try to go through this quickly, and I'm just making a note of the time. We're a little past 3:30, and we have a half hour. Is that right for the presentation?
Correct.
Okay, great. So I'm going to try to run through this so we'll have plenty of time for discussion. And as I say, I'll be recapping a lot of the wisdom that has already been shared in this meeting by the incredibly experienced, enlightened, and inspiring people for being a part of this. So I'm focusing on the crisis of democracy, and it's interesting that Howie and I both saw fit here to spend quite a bit of time talking about the crisis of democracy, because we are really in the target hairs. And democracy is really critical because it's the master switch. As Rose was saying, it's unfortunate that we have to spend so much time on geeky stuff that isn't sort of the daily bread of what we eat and how we breathe and all that. And we have to go back to this kind of infrastructure stuff. But it really is a master switch by which we either address the actual crises or not. So, this is our job, to challenge power and change course, because we really understand that has to be done. We really have no choice. So this slide just kind of summarizes, I think, what we've been saying here today, that we're sort of in this existential moment right now of essentially, existential crisis on virtually all fronts of social, economic, political, racial dimensions of our lives. And you've spoken to them magnificently. We won't take the time to go through them again. But the bottom line is that we are facing unprecedented threats to humanity and to the planet, including social systems, ecosystems, political systems, democracy, you name it. Because of that, we're not going to get out of here alive just by tweaking this around the margins. We really need a system change. And system change requires a vehicle, because, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. If we're just out there in the street and not actually challenging power as well, we can be written off and dismissed. And, we can go to the halls of power with a great bill and lobby for our bill. But the way the system is set up, to lobby, you need millions of dollars. That's how lobbying is done. It's not done with values and words and bodies. But when you then start actually challenging power, then everything changes. Then what you say actually matters. And so looking at what's driving this predatory system, it's not coming out of nowhere. It is, in fact, the product of a thing that has many names. We can call it the rapacious oligarchy. We can call it the empire. We can call it capitalism. Some economists are now calling it neo-feudalism, that we've actually moved from a ma and pa capitalist economy to a corporate capitalist economy to a neo-feudal economy, basically reversing the economic and political progress of the past many centuries. You can call it the colonial white supremacist patriarchal project, which is a mouthful, but is one of my personal favorites, the one that Ajamu uses all the time, which is so encompassing. And what I want to do right now is sort of focus on the democracy piece of this, which is one of many systems under assault by this rapacious oligarchy. But it is not just a system, it's also a master switch. And just briefly, some of the ways that democracy is under threat right now, I should say under assault, because it's not just threats, these are actually happening. Money in politics, the repression of political opposition, voter suppression, which you were speaking about here earlier in terms of the bills that are wiping out voters, especially voters of color. and low income and students and so on. So voter suppression is what it's all about. And as Howie mentioned, that voter suppression is not limited to racial and ethnic groups. It's also political. The suppression of voter choice. What good does it do you to vote if your candidates have been pre-selected by the empire and by oligarchy for their support of the continuing onslaught? Or shall we say, at least their meek opposition to it, if not their outright support. And I want to mention also lesser evilism as a form of suppression of voter choice. And I want to actually call it what it is, which is voter extortion. The whole lesser evil public relations campaign is a form of voter extortion that uses fear to manipulate voters. And for people who indulge in this, I think it's really important to remind them that there are solutions which are fundamentally small d democratic, that is ranked choice voting and proportional representation. We can eliminate the hysteria and the fears around a spoiler effect by creating a voting system that actually supports democracy instead of the one that we have, which suppresses democracy and suppresses voter choice. Restricted ballot access. So those are just, some of the ways that have been discussed here today, in which democracy is very much under threat. And I'm going to speak particularly about the repression of political opposition, because this is what I found I ran into. The other stuff we're used to, I'm sorry to say, we're not happy about it, but it's garden variety, how the Green Party and other progressive grassroots, non-corporate threats to empire are treated. We're always, restricted from the ballot and subject to voter extortion campaigns and, smothered by money in politics. But we're not accustomed to being personally attacked, vilified, the subject of legal proceedings and huge fines, lawsuits, etc. And this is kind of where my special experience has sort of come in since running for office. Since 2016, I have been sort of facing one form or another, which, in a way can be another rallying point, because it really is, I think it's a badge of honor that we count and that we are actually seen as an active threat to the rapacious oligarchy, that it still is expending time and energy in order to try to vilify us in the court of public opinion or criminalize us, and to basically silence and smear us. So I'm going to come back to that. But first, I want to just show a picture of democracy as the master switch. So here are all those, problems kind of abbreviated. Here's some of the many crises that we are facing. Democracy is the master switch. And, when you find that you go to the legislature in Florida with a great bill, to get rid of these holidays that memorialize slaveholders and abusers, you go to them with a great bill and they're, oh, that's great. And you get 8 sponsors and it won't move out of committee. This is not the exception. This is the rule. This is how it works. In fact, there's a well-known study that was done, I think in 2014, by a couple of academics by the name of Gillens and Page. And this was a huge study. It got actually a lot of press because what it showed was that stuff doesn't move. It looked at Congress as opposed to state houses, but it's essentially the same, and we're all familiar with it. Stuff doesn't move just for having public opinion behind it. It moves where there's money behind it, campaign contributions and lobbyists in particular. So that sort of makes the point that democracy doesn't stand alone. It's democracy versus oligarchy, which is why these struggles are very much connected. We sort of have to do them at the same time. And, just reminding us that democracy is a fragile thing and it requires many components. The right to vote, the need for political opposition. If you don't have opposing political parties and they aren't able to get on the ballot and be heard and covered in the media and present in the debates, you don't have a democracy. We need a free press, as opposed to a corporatized press, and so on. So there are many components here, and we're sort of operating with two hands tied behind our back. And just reminding here, as a reminder, that democracy is under threat because disparities in economic power are off the charts. And I won't take a lot of time because this is very familiar with us, but the numbers are compelling. And if, one of the purposes of writing this down in a chart is so that if it's useful for others, you can have it. And I do intend to ensure that it's fully resourced so that the sources are all there with their links and so on. So if this is useful, let me know. But much of this will be familiar. So the disparities in economic power, I found for myself, I took my eye off the ball for a couple of years because I was fighting the Senate Intelligence Committee for a while. And so I only had occasion to look again at the latest statistics, and it's just mind-boggling how they, you look away for a minute when you bring your eyes back on the chart. It's just, it's continued its absolute acceleration off the cliff. Wealth of the top 0.1% is equal to the wealth of the lower 90% altogether. Pretty staggering figure. It's worse than that now. This was pre-pandemic. 3 billionaires have the wealth of half of the US population. That too was pre-pandemic. And since the pandemic, the billionaires increased their wealth by $1.3 trillion as an additional 8 million people went into poverty. To start with, nearly 1 out of 2 Americans were in or near poverty. 80% are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost 70,000 people die every year from lack of health insurance. That was before COVID. During COVID, 1 out of every 3 deaths were linked to lack of health insurance and healthcare. 10 million are now thought to be at risk from eviction, and all of this is far worse for people of color. In the Boston area, the average net worth for the Caucasian family is almost $250,000. That's in the greater Boston area, while the average net worth of the African American family is $8. Just like, it's incredibly jaw-dropping, and it speaks volumes about how all of this is awful enough to start with, but then put it into communities of color, and it's no wonder people are in the streets. And we can anticipate that people are going to continue thronging in the streets for all of these reasons, whether you are looking at police violence or economic injustice or climate. I guess, in many ways, what these numbers are all about is that in spite of all the rhetoric, in spite of the squad, in spite of this FDR-like president that we have now, supposedly, things are continuing to inexorably move, shall we say, towards the brink. Empire is teetering at the brink, and that is both a crisis and it is an opportunity. And I especially want to stress that the work we are doing now is laying the groundwork for what comes next. And we can be sure that the audience for this revolt and for this agenda is going to grow. As Howie said earlier, our agenda is already thriving. In fact, I think it's fair to say you can go back to 2012 when our agenda first went up in the presidential campaigns, and then again in 2016, and then again in 2020. The current agenda with the Green New Deal and all the rest began to get a national audience at that point. And the fact that it was so broadly adopted by the squad, et cetera, by progressive Democrats of all stripes and beyond Democrats, our agenda has essentially won the day, whether you're looking at Medicare for All, which in fact was first promoted by Ralph Nader in the 2000 Green Party campaign, or the other issues from student debt bailout to reparations for slavery, to the Green New Deal, the right to a job, the Economic Bill of Rights. We have been on this for many campaigns now. And in a way, I think it's fair to say we may be losing the battles, but we are winning the war. Fox News had a whole series of polls just before the election that showed essentially our agenda was winning the day across the board. So while we may be in difficult straits right now, it's really important to know that our message is still getting through. And while communications have been thoroughly hijacked and corporatized, people get what's going on. So that's just, to encourage you to keep applying the courage of your convictions and doing your incredible work, because while they would like to pretend that we don't exist, in the words of, I think it's attributed to Gandhi, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And the fact that they are now attacking us in so many ways, throwing us off the ballot, bringing legal cases against us, really pulling out all the punches right now to try to silence and diminish us, vilify and smear us, really should be taken as a badge of honor. Let me jump ahead. This now is looking at how these disparities in economic power translate to disparities in political power. And we've just, these have been enumerated previously today, and I just alluded to several of them as well. And I want to provide you right now with a couple of little factoids about money in politics that just clarifies how it has really gone off the rails. If you look away for a minute, it gets worse. So elections more than ever are awash in big money. I'm going to do this fast here so we don't run over. The price tag in the 2020 election was $14 billion. That's more than twice as much as it was in 2016. That's another indicator that the system is very much in the stranglehold of oligarchy right now. And all this pretense that the breakaway is going to happen under Joe Biden or under the Democratic Party is a farce. If you look at the funding in the last election, $4.6 billion was coming from big business, labor. This is organized labor, which is not unencumbered itself, and is often very constrained by the Democratic Party. But even at that, labor only had 175 million. So this is a ratio of 26-1. So it's kind of clear. Small donors. We hear a lot about, small donors are now powering our electoral system. They amounted to 22% of those donations in 2020. So that is nonsense. Outside spending is skyrocketing. I think it's now like twice what it was in the last election, 2.6 billion, and much of it is coming through super PACs, dark money, and political parties. And we don't hear very much about political parties as a source of huge and dark money, but they actually are. And HR 1 will actually make it worse. 12 mega donors over the last 10 years, 12 people, in some instances, 12 couples have given $3.4 billion. So you can just imagine the kind of influence that buys. And let me just mention the role of national party committees. This is where the parties are a source of torrents of cash, and often unaccountable cash. And they can't actually donate cash, but they can spend money for you. If you are a presidential campaign, they can take on your expenditures almost without limit. Currently, they can spend up to $24 million on a presidential campaign. And as if that wasn't enough, HR 1 would raise that to $100 million that a political party can spend. So it just makes very concrete what it is that we're dealing with and why it is that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, for example, have so much power, because they control huge torrents of money, which is coming from, guess who? Very big donors, because the political party committees can accept up to $100,000 a pop, unlike individual donations, which are limited to $2,700. When you're donating to a national party committee, if you got deep pockets, you can give them a huge amount of money. So this creates this wonderful little triangle between the national parties and their leadership, the candidates, and the billionaires. So this is oligarchy in a nutshell, and why it is so powerful, and it empowers the party bosses. I mentioned how HR 1 raises the ceiling on those donations. And I won't go into detail here, except to just say that what that gives us then are neoliberal policies. And they're not going to come back from that. They will give it lip service in the same way that Joe Biden gave a lot of lip service to during the campaign, to, particularly to the $15 wage, to a public option, to a pharmaceutical negotiations plan, which would bring down the cost of pharmaceuticals through Medicare and Medicaid and so on. They're nowhere to be found. So his other plans that are on the table now, you'll hear a lot, oh, he's going to do great stuff on climate, or for the family plan, or the infrastructure program. Forget it. He knows who his masters are, and they very much are. And there is bipartisan consensus on this stuff. I'm not going to go through the details here. The repression of political opposition, I'm just going to summarize. And this is where I've sort of acquired my personal expertise on political opposition and how they try to go after you. And I should say that, Ralph Nader got a big taste of this, not just in the smear campaign that they came after him with, and the false accusation that he spoiled the election, which he certainly did not. It's outrageous. Have that discussion another day if we need to. I think you in Florida probably know that better than anyone else. But Ralph, after that campaign, in his next election, he had at one time 18 lawsuits against him to throw him off the ballot in 18 different states at once. And it turned out that those were being coordinated by the DNC, and illegal campaign contributions were being made by the Democratic Party law firms in order to enable him to be stopped. So they use lawsuits, and that is, it's just something we have to fight, and it comes with the territory, and we need to not be blindsided by it, and to just know that when you make enough noise that they're scared, they will spare no tools to try to stop you. So after the smear campaigns during the election, and I certainly got them on every count, from supposedly being an anti-vaxxer to having been a backbencher when I was in town meeting here in Lexington, which was not true. I was very busy organizing cities and towns around the state to try to save what was called our surplus land and other things. It was completely manufactured. So, those smear campaigns then became, that the recount was funded by Russians, that I stole the recount money, and that I was a Russian asset, with Hillary Clinton herself making that accusation of both me and Tulsi Gabbard. And you can't sue them for libel, because when you are a presidential candidate, you cannot do that. Or when you are a political candidate, actually, they can do that and get away with it. So then came the McCarthyite investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee, which went on actually for 3 years and 5 different reports, which just then enabled a whole series of smear campaigns and really tied me up and my team in debunking those accusations in social media and in the legacy media. And I am involved now. When that finally wrapped up, after 3 years, 1 week later, I got an email informing me that another federal agency had me in their target hairs. To put it mildly, I'm not at liberty to publicly discuss this case right now because I'm in conciliation on it, but suffice it to say, this is where I've been for the last 9 months. If you've noticed that I disappeared from social media and the usual activist things that I would like to be doing, I have had to fight another case in which our future, the future of our party, to access public funding, which we need in order to access the ballot, and which is all part of us having a voice as an independent grassroots political opposition party. So that's kind of what's on trial right now. And because I should say it hasn't quite gone, it's in an administrative proceeding right now. It hasn't gone to court. And fingers crossed that we won't have to go to court. We're actually using the law. We're using the law to argue the case in an administrative process, and we'll see where it goes. But we're arguing that we have a right to public funding. We have a right to access to the ballot, and that this is what we have to expect when we are effectively challenging power. And this would be reinforced by HR 1, as you may know, which also threatens our access to public funding. And I just want to give an email if people are interested, because I can speak about this in private settings. I cannot speak about it in a public setting. But if people are interested and you'd like to hear more and find out about helping in this fight to protect our ballot status and protect our political voice and our access to public funding, you can contact me. Just drop me an email at jillstein1.2016. Did I give the right one there? I'm not sure if I did. Actually, let me ask Kathy, who I think has that email at hand. If you can post it in the chat.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, great.
And for the live stream viewers, that is in fact jillstein1.2016@gmail.com. Once again, jillstein1.2016@gmail.com. And Dr. Stein, before we go to questions and answers, are you accepting donations for legal fees? And is there a place we should go for that outside of your email address?
Yes, exactly. And the best way to do that is to email me, because I have to be very careful not to violate my conciliation agreement, which is that I will not talk publicly about this case while I am in conciliation. So I can't give out website information and so on where you could throw some spare change into the hat if you are able. And yes, I do have a lawyer to pay and all sorts of administrative fees. And this is one of the ways that they basically hog tie you in order to keep you quiet and keep you out of the line of action. So I'm hoping to get back into the line of action once this case has been settled. So I appreciate any support that people are able to give, and you can just email me and I will let you know how to provide that support. Thank you so much, LeBeau, for asking.
I'm sorry, do you have 5 minutes or so for a Q&A?
I do. I'm good if you guys do, and I'm good with whatever your time frame is.
All right. So from Sean, we have a question. He's asking if we can expect to see a forthcoming book on your experiences with the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I would go further than that. I'd go back to the black site in Chicago with the handcuffs and all that stuff. Any interest in writing a book about your experiences?
Absolutely, yes. And you know, I'm always conflicted because as an activist, you know, we have so much to do. And you know, that's the struggle, is how do we do all the things we need to do and write a book about it. So I look forward to having the time someday to be able to do that, because I feel like there's a story that needs to be told. You know, our presidential campaigns are the work of hundreds of dedicated activists, and it was their commitment at a really important time, you know, before the Trump derangement syndrome developed, you know, and we still had a shot at some coverage by media. And, you know, I think that was what was so threatening to them. And so, you know, as a tribute to the people who made this happen, I feel like the whole story needs to be told. So fingers crossed that I get out of, you know, I feel like I'm a political prisoner right now, and there's not very much I can do. I can't go babysit for my granddaughter because I have to be fighting this case pretty much 24/7 for the last 9 months. And that was after Russiagate and the Senate Intelligence Committee for 3 years. So yeah, the fight goes on.
All right, we've got one more comment, but I do want to remind everyone that if you want to reach out to Dr. Stein and find out how you can support her, the email address is jillstein1.2016@gmail.com. Steve Baker has a comment. Steve?
Steve, you're on mute.
It's great to hear, Jill. Thank you for coming and joining us. And you joined us, what was it, 2 years ago? I can't remember. It's just good to have you aboard. And I remember talking to you on the phone. I think it was like in the 2016 campaign when you called me for a donation, and I said, well, what are we going to do about Bernie Sanders? And you said, do you think they're going to let him be the nominee? And the reason why I bring this up is because it plays right into what you were just saying with your presentation, that from my understanding, Bernie Sanders mostly raised his money on individual donations. And if you're raising your money on individual donations, then you are not able to be controlled by the corporate Dem money that comes in on the train in the billions. And that's why they had to get rid of him. And that, my opinion, and that's why they had to get rid of him again in the last election. And people don't realize just how dark it all is. But hey, but we're going to keep trying. And I'm with you, Jill. And if I can help you with the book, let me know.
Thank you, Stephen. You know, I'll just say that from one point of view, it's very dark, but from another point of view, the light is shining in through the tunnel in a very big way, because the empire's days are numbered. It is self-destructing in all kinds of ways. Just look at, for example, how the latest Israeli-U.S. assault on Palestine is playing out right now. You know, it is a whole different ballgame from the way that it's been for decades. So, you know, the empire's days are numbered, and it's really important for us to be laying the groundwork as fast as we can, because people will be joining us. You can count on that.
Dr. Stein, I'd like to thank you once again so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to see you, and let us know anything that we can do to continue to support you and defend you and your work. You have a wonderful afternoon, and if you have anything in the Green Party of Florida, you just let us know.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your very inspirational meeting here today. I've been dropping in on it throughout the day, and it's really wonderful. Keep it up. Thank you.